Wrong. There we go. Hi, I'm Jen Clymer. You are watching Creative Chaos. Really grateful to have you with us today. And it's that time inside Hollywood with Hawk Koch. Freda, nice to see you. Hello, Hawk. Great to have you with us.
Happy to be here.
And we're happy to have you, Hawk, every single time. You bring the best.
Thank you.
And I'm really excited about Amy today because while we all love being entertained by movies, we know that the power that film has is so profound and how it can affect social change. And Amy is fearless in telling the stories that need to be told. So thank you for bringing her onto the show. And we all look forward to this. So thank you very much.
Great, great. Well, here we go. Today, I do have the pleasure of introducing Amy Ziering. Amy is an Oscar-nominated, two-time Emmy-winning investigative filmmaker whose projects directly impacted American politics and culture. According to a new magazine that I just saw, Amy is now known as the Me Too movement's preeminent documentarian. Her collective filmography has led to 5 congressional hearings, and over 35 policy reform laws have passed in Congress. Sweeping reform policies at hundreds of institutions, products removal from shelves, and national discussions. Amy works with her partner, her directing producing partner, Kirby Dick. Their most well-known docs include, I'm not giving you all of them, just include The Invisible War, dealing with rape in the US military. That won 2 Emmys and was nominated for an Oscar. The Hunting Ground, about the incidents of sexual assault on college campuses and the failed response of college administrators. Among other awards, it won the Stanley Kramer Award at the Producers Guild. And those of you who know my association with the Producers Guild, I was very proud that it won the Kramer Award the year that it came out. They also did a documentary called The Bleeding Edge, a deep dive into the $400 billion medical device industry. They found shockingly lax regulations, corporate cover-ups, and profit-driven incentives that put patients at risk daily. Most recently, you may have seen Allen v. Farrow, their 4-part HBO, changing the name of the series, 4-part HBO series documenting the accusation of sexual abuse by Woody Allen against his 7-year-old daughter, Dylan. Amy is an incredible force in our industry. And when she decides to take on a subject, we are all eager to hear about it and see it. I'm honored to have her with us today. Welcome, Amy Ziering.
Thank you, Hawk. I'm so happy to be here. I'm so honored. I'm so touched you asked me.
Oh, well, I'm excited. And I get to do what you get to do all the time, which is ask the questions. Unfortunately, you're going to have to answer them.
I hate that.
We'll see how you do. We'll give you a grade at the end of the time. So, Amy, you grew up in Beverly Hills, and I understand you had a nice, normal life. You had a mom, you had a dad, you had several sisters, and at 15 years old, something happened that you did not know about. Can you tell us about that?
Well, I just want to, for the record, I have 1 sister and 2 wonderful brothers.
Oh,
so
sorry.
4 kids,
All right.
half and half. But yes, well, I came home from high school and on my bed was a binder. You know, this was in the 70s. So it was just that black. I mean, I so remember that brown paper kind of with the big paper clips through it, you know, and I didn't know what it was. And I opened up the first page and it was a play. And the title page said, If I Were God. And it was written by my dad. And if you know my dad is anything but an art guy, like no hobbies, workaholic, you know, very science and business driven. And so I didn't like, this just didn't, like, it was kind of cognitive dissonance. I didn't even understand what this was. So I sat down and started reading it, and it was about two boys, teenage age, watching their mothers through the window in selection lines in a concentration camp.
Whoa.
And yeah, and their dialogue, for 3 acts, like, well, what's going to happen to mom? And then, would it be their mom? And I sat and read the whole thing through. And then I went and talked to my dad, and I had known he was a survivor, but that was it. There was never, ever not one conversation ever about it. It was just something we knew. And, as a self-centered kid, that was it. It was just part of family biography, but you didn't really reflect on it much or think about it. And this was the first time I really had any understanding or had to confront it or had any knowledge of what he had gone through. And so that was a very profound moment in my life. I don't know if it was the pivotal transformative moment, but it had a huge effect on me, obviously, as it would anyone.
Right. And has that legacy throughout your life impacted your life because of your father?
I didn't know or piece it together ever, and also, as you pointed out, I don't like talking about myself. I like asking questions. I don't find myself that interesting, and I also know the answers, so it's not like, so who cares? But I was doing an interview in Australia, and it really, and I don't mind those interviews when it's on a subject. And we were talking about, it was after Invisible War. And she said, why do you do what you do? Which was the first time anyone asked me anything. And I thought, I didn't know. I was like, well, why do dancers? I don't know. And then I thought about, and then, it's interesting, therapy, like the thing that popped in my mind was finding the play on the bed. And so then I started thinking about that. And then I said, well, one of the conversations that happened after I found the play, I started talking to my dad, and I said, this is amazing. And thank you. And why didn't you ever talk to us? Like, I'm grateful you spared me this pain, but like what? And he said, when we got out, and he was young, he went in at 13 and got out at 18. So he said, which is part of the reason why he survived. He was the right age, right? He could work. He was of value.
Which camp was he in?
He was in several. I don't remember all of them. I remember Buchenwald, the Riga ghetto. Fuhlsbrittle was the prison when they liberated him. And there were 2 more, but I blanked that out. But I said, why didn't you ever speak about this? And he said, when we got out of the camps, I tried to, and I would find no one wanted to hear about it, or they didn't believe me. And he said, so at that point, I just shut down. It was like, well, that was the message I got. Like, this is my pain and my struggle, and there's no good can come from speaking of it. And he really, and so that was until he was, I think, I don't know, how old was he when I was 16? In his 50s is when the first time he said anything to the world, and he did it in the form of a play, which I think he felt could be controlled, and he wouldn't feel rejected. Like, if someone reads it or doesn't read it, at least he had made his testament, so.
What's interesting, Amy, is your documentaries, you talk about in most of them, how nobody wanted to hear about it and no one would believe me. Oh. And I think that it's so wild that from that came this. Yeah. And how your docs are trying to prove, hey, listen to these people and believe them.
Yeah, no, so I pieced it when that interviewer said that, I pieced it together. I thought, well, maybe this is why I do this, is like to try and, give to people what my dad didn't get, which is like a little bit of support and interest, and just listen, and in that way validate their experience. So yeah, I mean, that has been a theme in my work.
So, okay, you find this out, you're a good student, you get into Amherst, and do you have any idea what you want to do in life, or you just want to go and liberal arts? What did you want to study in college, or where was your head at that time?
I was one of the few lucky ones. I had a very clear direction. I was super academic, and I was super interested in literature, politics, and philosophy. And that did not shift. And I was not in, again, why I don't like interviews. I wasn't terribly interesting. I sat around in libraries and read. And that to me was a good time. I think you can count the number of frat parties I went to on one finger. It wasn't, I remember it. It was one. I was like, this is not for me. Why do people do this? So that was it. So I'm not that interesting. I was a hardcore academic, loved it, knew I wanted to go to grad school, did go to grad school. And the only reason I ended up doing film is like, I didn't get the job I wanted, honestly.
What was the job you wanted?
I did 10 years in graduate school and then I applied for jobs. This was the early 90s. And I got like a 1-year teaching fellowship at UC Riverside. I taught at Bennington. I didn't get, I was like shortlisted for some jobs at Cornell, but I didn't get, I think I got something in Arkansas or Tennessee. And
So
I was like,
you wanted to teach philosophy.
I wanted to teach. I wanted to read and teach and like have the world leave me alone, but I didn't get that job. And I had a professor at Yale when I was doing my doctorate, and his name was Jacques Derrida. I don't know if anyone, and for those that don't know, if you know the word deconstruction, that's his thing. And I was fascinated with his work. And again, what was this? This was the late 80s and he didn't pay much attention to me. And so I thought, well, I'll make a film on him because that way he'll have to talk to me and like think I'm interesting. And I got him to say yes, which was impossible. He had never even like done interviews or had photographs. He was really, again, he was all about the work and like, ugh, that's vanity. He was like the anti-Kardashian. And I persisted and persisted. And I got the French embassy to give me a grant. And I showed up on his doorstep and I made this film on him, and that did really well. And so I thought, well, maybe, and I liked making films because it used a different skill set that academe doesn't. Like I like the intellectual, but I do have this social part a little bit. And that, producing, as you know, as a producer, you get to do more in the world, and that spoke to me. So I thought, oh, okay, well, maybe I should make films.
And how did Jacques feel about it when it was over? Did he like the documentary?
Oh God, you have to show documentary subjects the work before it goes public. Like it's an agreement you make, right? I mean, so they're not. And so that was in contract with him. Like he didn't have any control, but he had to see it. So he physically, I don't remember where we were, but I do remember this is how he sat next to me. Literally his hands, like he was so mortified. I thought he hated it. He has his hands up like blinders, like horse blinders. Like who does that? And I thought, oh, I'm going to be like, no, he'll never talk to me again. And he, sat down and he said, I accept. And that was it. I was like, okay. And then it did really well. And I remember in one Q&A, he said, I love, someone asked, what do you think? And he said, I love the film. And I was like, oh, thank you.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great. So now you're 10 years in grad school. What were you trying to get out of the Army draft? That's what I did.
No, it was nothing that I liked reading books. I liked teaching. I was a slow learner and a slow worker. It was heaven. I mean, grad school was probably for me one of the best times of my life, honestly.
It was 10 years. 10 years.
Was it really 10 years? I think so. I mean, I think I got there in 84 and I left in 91. So not 10 years, so 7 years, right?
Wow.
7 years, but then 2 years trying to write a dissertation. So.
All right. So now you finished grad school. What happened? How did you become I think I'll produce documentaries. I mean, the first one I know you did is this one that I saw, I didn't know you. This was about this homeless man in Santa Monica who was running for city council or something. And it was so interesting. I loved it. I mean, how did that come about?
I cannot believe you saw that, you and my mother. And I love that you saw it.
Oh, I loved it.
It was a really good movie. How did that come about? Well, I called my girlfriend, since this is a Hollywood industry. I went to Beverly High, so a lot of people went into the industry.
Me too.
Yay. I went and I was in grad school and I called her and I said, oh my God, Derrida gave me his permission. You don't even know who he is. He's a big deal. Trust me. I have no idea about filmmaking. And she's like, oh, you should meet some filmmakers when you come out here. And another friend, an academic, I did the same thing, Margie Waller, may she rest in peace. She just passed away from COVID. And I said, Margie, I got Derrida's permission. She knew who she was. She was like, holy shit. And she said, there's this filmmaker out in Santa Monica named Richard Cohen. call him, like maybe he can like give you tips. So when I came home for whatever, I met with Richard and he said, I need a producer. And I said, I'll do it. And so that's how, and it was, and he said, and
Do you know what a producer was?
no, nothing. And he said, you know, and we, he said, I've always wanted to make a film on the homeless. And we found, and he had befriended Ron Taylor, who decided to run for city council as a homeless person. And he did really well. So we followed his campaign and it was called Taylor's Campaign. It was a good film.
Oh, it was very good.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah. Richard's a great filmmaker.
But that wet your whistle, I assume. And
Well, that taught me a lot.
Yeah.
And then the other friend from high school, Debbie Zeitman, who's alive and well, she was then assistant editor on Dead Poets Society. And I call her out of the blue and I'm like, SOS, I've got this guy's okay. I don't know what I'm doing. And she's like, you know, there's this guy out in Silver Lake named Kirby Dick. I don't know if his work's any good, but I love his editor, her Dodie Dorn, who ended up doing Memento. And I don't have a great memory, but she's a big deal. Google her and she's lovely. And she said, and they're working on a film and maybe we can go watch a rough cut because I get invited to watch it. So I went and met Kirby, flipped out over his film. It was called Sick. It was a documentary. He's like the only other person in LA who had heard of Derrida at the time. And I said, I'm making this film. Will you help? And he was amazing. And he convinced me to co-direct. At first I was like, I'm going to do this. And I was like, I'm crazy. I cannot do this alone. And so then that's how it happened. So then from there in, and then Derrida did okay. And then I said, you know, I'm all in.
Okay, well, so now you're all in documentaries, but the next thing you do is a drama. You do a drama called The Memory Thief that you produced with your ex-husband. He wasn't your ex-husband at the time, Gil Kaufman, about a toll booth operator with a growing obsession with the Holocaust. Now, had you been drawn to? Were you looking for stories about the Holocaust?
No, not at all. I
Where
ran
did this
like
come
my dad. I inherited his. I mean, I'd liked it to be very, very far away, but my husband lost his producer and said, I need help. And I helped him. So it made me learn I didn't want to do fiction. That's for sure.
Had his family been Holocaust survivors?
No, not at all. His family's Israeli, but no, his dad, no, not at all.
No, but you knew, I mean, you knew he was doing a film about the Holocaust.
I did, but it was not, that was just a lot. You help your spouse. He was like, I need someone now. You're great. Let's do this. And I was like, of course I'll help you. So that's how that happened. It's a really good film. It's interesting. It's before its time.
Yeah.
You know, it's sort of about empathy and trauma and obsession and false memory. It's interesting.
That one I haven't seen, but maybe you'll get me a way to see it.
I will.
All right. So now you go back to investigative documentaries and you're really find your stride now, and you're partners with Kirby, and you guys do one called Outrage, an indictment of closeted politicians who lobby for anti-gay legislation. I mean, unbelievable. Let me ask you a question. Do you think times have changed?
A little bit. I mean, there's still obviously very powerful people right now who I know a lot about who are closeted and doing horrible things to the gay community. But I think that, or the LGBTQI community, yeah, but.
Wait a minute, what's the I?
Someone help me. Who's out there? Someone out there.
I believe it's either inquiring or investigating.
I don't actually.
LGBTQ is.
Thank you. Right. There's more letters now, and there's asexual now too, and there's a whole bunch of letters. But anyways, it's a very fluid time, as it should be with identity. But what was your question now that we got down that rabbit hole?
Do you think times have changed?
Oh, in terms of politicians?
Yes.
That's very interesting. I think that what our film did was, before Outrage came out, and just to explain the title, which I don't like, I did not want, but the out is a pun on outing someone. Okay, so it's Outrage. I wanted the glass closet, which to this day I think would have served the film much better. And it was about how politicians who are closeted actively legislate against their own people in order to sort of, accrue
Push the,
and get more votes. But it's really hypocritical and horrible but yes, I know for sure there are still many closeted politicians, but I do know that one thing that our film did, which is before the film, no media would ever talk about the private life of anyone who was not heterosexual. Just did not happen. They would talk, Kevin Hart, not Kevin Hart. Come on, this
Gary
is like
Hart.
Jeopardy. What?
Gary Hart.
Gary Hart, right. I mean, fair game for anyone who's heterosexual, but if you were not heterosexual, it was the third rail, as if there's something, which is kind of strange, right? As if like we can't even talk about that.
Nobody talks about Barry Diller or David Geffen.
Right. So post our film, it became fair game to talk about politicians' private lives if they were not heterosexual. And that was a big shift. But in terms of, other than that, mezzo. I mean, I think somewhat. I mean, look, we had a presidential candidate who was out for the first time in history. So
Right.
yes, I do think things are changing, maybe not as fast as I'd like them to be. We really tried hard to out certain people who I wish I could name right now, who, believe me, are doing horrible things and really, really powerful. That's as much as I'll say. I can maybe
Anybody
say
from South Carolina?
And so we tried. But anyways, yeah.
Right.
So
So what's the process you go through before deciding? Because I know it takes a long time to make a documentary. It's not, you've got to research, and then you've got all the stuff you've got to go through. You and Kirby sit down and, look at a whole bunch of stuff and say, here's a subject I'm interested, here's a subject. And then finally you guys you pick up a gin rummy card, gin, this is what we're going to go. How does that process work?
it's very involved, and it's very organic, and it's very idiosyncratic. Like the way that Alan v. Farrow came about is different from the way On the Record came about, is different from how Outrage came about. Outrage, we just sat down for lunch in DC, and we with a bunch of, I forget even why we were there. And some woman at lunch said, "Oh my God, this town is gay and no one knows it." And we were like, "What?" and we were like, "Well, that's interesting." And she started naming names, and she was like, "Oh yeah." And we found out about this whole subculture that apparently runs DC, which is interesting because staffers have no lives, right? And who are the best people to have no lives? People without kids, so it all ended up started to make sense, but then they all had to be closeted because of all the phobias. So it was interesting. So we thought, well, this is really rich psychological territory, and this is really rich political territory, when she started rattling off the names of all these people who were doing horrible things and yet utilizing, weaponizing the culture war in order to, accrue more power. So
I just because I'm a movie person, I can just see the woman getting up saying, "Well, it's nice to talk to you." You and Kirby looking at each other and going, "Well, that's our next subject." How do we not do this, right?
Well, we didn't, right. But that's one good way of, we looked at each other, and then we started investigating, calling people, and it was more interesting stories after one interesting story. So we were like, okay, we're in. And then how do we do this? So that's different. Invisible War, I simply read an article in Salon, walked into Kirby's office and said, what the actual, it seems like if you're assaulted in the military, you have no recourse. Yes, you heard that right. No recourse to an impartial system of justice. Could this be true? How do you know? Blah, blah, blah. And he was like, get on the phone and start talking to people. So I called the reporter. I said, how many people did you talk to? And what are you talking about? And she's like, I wasn't writing an article about this. I was just writing about women in the military. I called 20 women. 12 of them told me assault stories. She said, so I pivoted and started writing about it. I was like, oh my God, has anyone picked this article up? She's like, no, nothing. And so that's how that one started, which is very different. And we just sort of started our own investigating. And when there's a there, we thought, okay, that's important. So everyone is different. I don't have a map.
All right. So let me ask you a question. You talked about high school and college being a person who's sitting over in a corner and reading and studying and comparative literature and, I don't know, reading Proust or whoever. And now, from what I've gathered in knowing you for a few years, You're not sitting over a corner. You are questioning and questioning and questioning. What turned? What made that turn? And there, because obviously, I know I said to my kids when they were young, if pumping gas is what you love to do, go pump gas, you know. And my oldest son at one point, who was in the movie business, said, Dad, I don't want to be in the movie business. I want to be in the horse race business. And I'm going, oh my God, what did I do? Right. And he's 51 years old, and he's at the track every morning at 6:30 in the morning with the trainers and the jockeys. And then he goes home and works on it, and then is there in the afternoon with all of the owners that he manages. He loves it. So it's a long story to say to you, what made you all of a sudden realize, man, I love sitting in front of somebody and pulling out what they need? How did you do that? What made you?
Well, I think the same thing that makes you want to sit and read all of Henry James is an innate hunger and curiosity. And so I don't think it's that far a leap to want to sit and really dive into a subject and talk to people and extract, you know, and that's why I don't, and that hunger and curiosity has never died. And that's the same kind of thread. And then in Derrida, obviously, I used my analytical and philosophical skills. I mean, that film, if you watch it, it's not a biography in a conventional sense. It's a sort of a meta biography and a meditation on biography. So that for me was using a whole, you know, I got to use a range of muscles and skill sets that really activate me. And I would say that even Alan v. Farrow, then my political interests obviously were answered by Invisible War and Hunting Ground, and I can talk more about sort of the thinking that goes into making those how to strategically land those and craft them. But Alan v. Farrow was also very philosophical in that, you know, if you look at the analysis and the reading of his films, like that kind of was a reflection of my analysis and training, like how his films in turn, not only in private, one could imagine there were, I have to be careful legally, not only in private, one could imagine there were predatory actions being taken, but the way in which his films bore witness to those dynamics.
Right.
And how if we closely read those films, they are in fact grooming us and normalizing certain predatory behaviors. So that for me is still, you know, a reflection of my academic roots.
Right. I got a chat from one of our crack people who are working with us that I stands for intersexual, LGBTQIs, intersexual.
Oh, okay, intersexual.
For anybody out there who wants to know, what I love about your docs is you breathe life into those stories, and you personalize them in such a way that you just know that there's an honesty there. And what I find is when you're questioning these people, starting with Invisible War, I guess, that I watched several times, you just know there's truth there. And I feel like you really get to the truth in all of your documentaries. That's your mantra. I'm going to get to the truth. So we don't have time to talk about all of the documentaries, so we'll concentrate on a few, and we'll start with Invisible War. You told us about how the Salon piece came about, and now you're going to go and try and talk to military women, and you're going to have to get, I'm sure, permission from the military, which is not easy, and the US government, which is even more difficult. How were you able to, convince the government, convince the military, and then convince the women that they could actually talk to you? You would be able to put it on a screen. They would become famous or infamous. And as you found out, you know, most people don't want to listen or believe, don't want to hear their stories. So I realize that's a big question, but I think take us through how this happened.
Well, that's a crazy story. So I don't even know where to start. First of all, we at that point, we'd made Outrage for HBO. I don't remember what else we had done. Well, I'd done Toast Campaign. You would know, you've read my biography, but I mean, we were established and well-respected. We were nominated for 2 Emmys for Outrage, I think, so we were, and yet when we went around after reading that article, we pitched it, we couldn't get any money. So Kirby and I, and we were shocked, but this was, not that long ago. People were like, no one's interested in stories about rape. No one's interested in women's stories. So we've come a long way, and no one's interested about women in the military. So Kirby and I just jumped, we jumped in the car and we drove around the country, actually. And it was 21 states and 21 different women. And we just started interviewing them. And a lot of them had been discharged or dishonorably discharged because of the PTSD, right? So there wasn't a problem talking to them. So they were nervous because, obviously, but as long as we didn't name their perpetrator, and they were grateful. They were like, no one has cared about us. We got discharged for something that wasn't our fault. So that part wasn't hard, but you're right. We did need to talk to senior members of the military, and we did need to get into the Pentagon. So this is a funny story, but we are streaming live. I don't know if I can tell this story, honestly.
Sure you can.
You think I can? What?
Yeah.
Okay, will you bail me out?
I will.
Okay, so we had to get the Pentagon's approval to do the interviews with the senior members of the military, and also one of the survivors' dads really wanted to speak, and he was a sergeant, and he needed to get approval. So we didn't. The catch-22 is you cannot get approval if you don't have a distribution deal. And remember, I told you no one would give us money. So one day I'm sitting there and going, okay, I'm doing this, Kirby. I'm going to write in the subject bar, HBO filmmakers interested in blah, blah, blah. And then in the body of the email, I didn't say HBO is a distributor, but it's true. We are HBO filmmakers. I mean, Kirby had made a film for HBO that was nominated for an Oscar at that point. And I said, we made Outrage.
Oh, we froze.
That's not honest, blah, blah, blah. And I I pushed send. It's like, oops. And, within 5 minutes, they were like, absolutely, come on in. I think it's the last time they've let a film crew in the Pentagon, but we got in, and it was I just was like, and then this is a very funny story. I hope, okay, so this is hilarious. So we get in, we get permission, we do these interviews, which are amazing. They're in Invisible War, actually, with the generals and all that. And then we had to, though, in the clause, in their release, it says they have to watch a rough cut and they have to have 72 hours. Okay. So we were like, our films are very aggressive, but Invisible War, I will say, is very pro-military, but still very aggressive. This is not a gentle little walk in the park. And we were terrified, and we knew, and the clock was running, and we knew we had to, for Sundance, and we had to get it to them. And this was the genius of Tanner Barklow, who was our producer at the time. And he said, let's not send it to the DC office. He says, let's drive it to the office in Westwood. Let's drop it off on Christmas Day. These guys are used to doing Bruckheimer films. They're used to doing Top Gun. They're going to go, oh, Invisible War, what's this? Oh, how cute, right? And then 17 hours later, we'll just drive over and pick it up. And sure enough, 17 hours later, we sent an intern, and I called and I said, hey, we're coming back to get Invisible War. And they're like, what? And we're like, oh yeah, the contract says you guys had 70. And they were completely, it was Christmas and New Year's. They had no idea. So we went and grabbed it, and the rest was history. Now here's the scary part though, Hawk. This was the terrifying part, is because that sergeant that dad talked in our movie. There were 2 people. There was Ariana's husband. Oh, I'm blanking on his name. He's absolutely amazing. There were 2 men who said, we're going to talk. We don't care. We don't have permission. And he was a captain. And we knew that we had to have the film be so strong that the military wouldn't punish them, right? That was our only protection. And so we had it on firm lockdown. Like, I was terrified. I was like a mother cub, and only Sundance could see it. I remember writing to Sundance saying, this is one copy. You are not sharing it. You are not copying it. People could be court-martialed. You have to understand, blah, blah, blah. I'm sitting on Montana, getting my hair colored. Yeah, it's not real. And Nancy Willen calls me. She goes, you're going to kill me, but don't. I didn't do this. There's clips from Invisible War on the 7 o'clock news. Turn on Brian Williams. And I'm like, what?
Oh my God.
And I'm like, this is impossible. And I'm trembling because this is 3 nights before Sundance. And I turn on the news. I'm at the hair salon. And it's not the film. It's just the trailer. And so I call her back and I'm like, it's the trailer. The film didn't get leaked. The trailer's out. It's okay. And she's like, oh, okay. I was like, because I was like having a heart attack. And I was like, but what are we doing on the news? We haven't even opened at Sundance. We're a tiny film. And it basically was, they were smart. The Pentagon knew a film was coming out. They hadn't seen it and they were worried about the PR onslaught. So they had a film. So they said, oh, a film's coming on the military. And then they paraded out Panetta, who said, everything's okay. Yes, we know it's a problem. It's to preempt the critique. Does this make sense? Am I?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And why I'm telling you this is the brilliance. If you watch Invisible War, it's because Kirby, at one point, we'd finished it. We'd almost locked picture. He looks at me, he goes, the second this thing comes out, they're going to hold a press conference and say it's all BS, or we've got it covered. He says, so we have to put inside the film a montage of them doing that. And we did. And he said, we have to put Panetta in the film. And we did. And then I couldn't believe that everything he said was true because it happened 3 nights before. I was like, oh my God, you did it. He goes, yeah, I inoculated us. And anyways, the film came out and it was a tsunami, and thank God. I mean, Panetta did end up seeing it. Jen Siebel Newsom, Governor Newsom's wife, was an executive producer. She got it to Panetta. She was at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. She goes, I'm sitting with Leon. She called me. She's like, what do you want me to do? I'm saying, get him to watch the film. And so she says, okay, send me a DVD. So we got him to watch the film, and then it's in his book, and he called a press conference and he changed military policy 3 days later.
Isn't that fantastic?
It's unbelievable, honestly.
Yeah. Well, that's quite a story. So now it blows up. It's all over everywhere. Everybody knows about it. And you get nominated for Emmys and you get nominated for Oscars. Now, I think the Emmys come first, don't they, or not? Oh, no, maybe the Oscars came first that year.
I don't remember.
Yes. But take us through, because I know a lot of people, a lot of our residents and a lot of our industry people are watching this, and take us through. Here's this wonderful, smart woman who's been doing all this stuff, and she's nominated for an Oscar, and you're going to go sit in the audience at the Dolby Theater, and you're up against some pretty good competition. What was your feeling? I mean, tell us about walking that red carpet. What happened?
Well, you're part of this story because I did not care. I mean, I was thrilled, honored beyond belief. So I don't want to say, but I really wanted those soldier survivors to be at the Oscars, and they were really tight with tickets. And we were the poor relation. We were this documentary before documentaries were sexy or hot, or no one gave it. There was no Tiger King. Like, we were really like persona non grata. And I appealed to you. I called Carol Ann. I said, I got to get these women there. And you did it, Hawk. I don't know if you remember. And I went up at the lunch and I thanked you.
I do remember this, but I wasn't looking to take credit. Sorry that I brought it up.
So Corey came, and Ariana and Ben Clay, they came, and Corey and her husband. And that to me meant the universe. So all of us being on this little film no one wanted, no one cared about, these survivors who'd been through hell and dishonorably discharged. And I mean, there's nothing that compares to it. It was honestly, it was amazing.
Okay. And then you win 2 Emmys for it.
Yeah, that was crazy. That was crazy.
Now I'm sure HBO was it distributed by HBO?
Yes, PBS ended up taking it.
Oh, PBS.
Thank God for PBS.
By the way, I'm watching Hemingway. I don't know if you've watched it.
Not yet. No, I'm dying to.
Pretty amazing. Any rate, so okay, all of this happens, and now you guys go back into your office and say, okay, what's next? Right?
Well, then we were working on something for HBO actually, and deep into it, and our inboxes started getting emails from kids around the country. Okay, so because we just don't make films we then want to do, change the world with them. So we had like a real intense impact campaign. So we started showing Invisible War on campuses everywhere. And Kirby and I, there was so much demand that Kirby and I split up, and we would trade notes afterwards. And he was like, the craziest thing happened like after Invisible War, like 2 students came up to me and said this happened to them at Bowdoin. And I was like, oh yeah, that's insane. Like 3 people came up to me at Berkeley. And then he was like, 2 people came up to me at, Claremont colleges. So, and then our inboxes started getting emails and people were saying, please, Miss Ziering, please, Mr. Dick, make a film about what's going on campuses. So we were like, oh no, what is going on campuses?
You
And
opened Pandora's box.
yeah, and we went to HBO and we said, we kind of feel like we have to answer we have to respond to these students. They're saying they need help. And I felt like a mother cub. I had kids in college. And so that's how that happened. So again, we had no thought. We had no expectation. We were doing something entirely different. And we just got sucked in and we ended up making The Hunting Ground, which ended up dovetailing the student movement and sort of amplifying that. And
okay, all right, so slow down now. I'm going to pull you back a little bit now. Okay, you're going to go on college campuses and you're walking around with your camera and you're having interviews. Now the administrators must have, some of them must have known about the Invisible War. They were,
yeah.
And so
it was easier to get the Pentagon to talk to us than it was any college president. Look at the film. There aren't any.
Yeah, I don't know if you've seen the movie that's nominated for an Oscar this year, Promising Young Woman, but I love. Oh, you got to see it. There's a great scene where she goes in and talks to the president of the university about something that happened to her when she was a medical student.
Oh,
and
wow!
Calls the president on.
I've got
her shit. It was a woman president. Anyway, you should. I think you'd enjoy that movie just because of what you guys do. You should see it. Wonderful film. Any rate, so it's almost impossible to get to them. And is it because of Invisible War that all of these female students feel that they can trust you and I want to tell my story?
100%. I don't remember exactly, and I spoke to over 100 students easily, maybe 200, and it was off the charts how many had seen Invisible War and said they were speaking because that gave them courage and that made them trust, that their stories would be safe, and they would be heard and believed. So yeah, no, that was a game changer.
I wonder, this just came to me, but I wonder in today, as opposed to even, I think it was 2016 was Hunting Ground. Today, I wonder if you could go back and say, if that movie was coming out now, you could say, we could only put X number of stories in our documentary, but if you'd like, you could go to this website and see all the other people who told us their stories.
That's a nice idea. What we did was, that's a great idea. We didn't think of it at the time because we do we interview many more people that end up in the film, obviously.
Yeah.
But what we did at Invisible War, if you look at the end, there's this wall, there's the end credits are over all these photographs, walls and walls and walls. And those were all the people that we asked to send us photographs if this had happened to them. And you see them all in uniform and it gives me the chills even thinking about it.
Right.
But yeah.
Well, but I mean, today, I mean, as you're going through, I don't know that people did it back then. It's
right.
But today, even 60 Minutes says at the end of 60 Minutes on Sunday nights, if you want to learn more about this, go to our website and there's all this other extra stuff.
Right.
That would be interesting for another doc that you're doing. So, okay, so you make this film, it comes out, again, it's very well received, probably except for university presidents. Do you think that the women do you think it gave confidence to the women who came out against Harvey Weinstein and some of the Me Too movement, which happened the next year? Do you think that
Well, I think what happened with that, since this is an Inside Hollywood, this was a crazy story. This was a fun one. So with Invisible War, I had no thought we'd get the Oscar nomination, but I thought, you know what? we could get a song nomination. That's low hanging fruit. And it was all about attention to the issue. And if we get, so, and Kirby's like, you're crazy. And I had no connections. And I don't know what, and I don't, oh, well, one of our producers, our executive producers, Maria Cuomo Cole, knew Mary J. Blige. I wrote to all my executive producers, like, do you know any of these? And she's like, I know Mary, you know, she did something with, I don't remember, one of my siblings or something. And so I was like, okay, cool. And so Mary, I wanted an original song for Invisible War. Didn't work out. She gave us a great song, but she wouldn't do it. She could, whatever. But this was in my brain. So Hunting Ground, I was like, I'm going to do this. And Kirby's like, we don't have time. That took so much time, the Mary J. Blige song, and you didn't land it. No, I need you as a, you know, you stay focused, do not. And of course I didn't listen. And I was like, I see it. I see it. We're going to do this. And by some miracle, we got Paul Blavin, like got me to, I want to give everyone their due. Ehrlich, vision I have, and she knew Gaga. She'd done like things with her, and she said, I'll pitch it to her. And somehow she got her to say yes. And we got Diane Warren to write a song, co-write a song with her. And it was amazing. And that got the nomination. The reason I'm telling you this is that got the Oscar nomination. My vision realized. And then I said to Gaga and Diane, we have to have survivors on stage when you do the song. We have to, and so Bobby Campbell, Gaga's manager, calls me back, is okay, good idea, 12 only max. And I'm like, 12 will look like, I don't know what it'll look like. It'll look like singers that don't know what they're doing. I said, no, you need a wall. And I also wanted to thank all the kids that whether they were in the film or not, like give them the opportunity. And so he's like, I don't know. And I was like, he's like, it would take a lot of money and we're not paying it. And so I called I said, give me 24 hours. I called executive producers. I need $200,000. I need survivors on stage. And they're like, done, call Bobby back. He's like, you're magic. And we got those kids out there and she gave that performance. There was not were you there?
Oh yeah.
There was not
as you remind me of it.
There was not a dry eye in the house. You can go look it on Google. A standing ovation. Kate Capshaw and Steven are behind me. Spielberg, Kate's crying. Brie Larson. I mean, I can't even tell you, like, right? President Joe Biden did the introduction. It was phenomenal. I think that is not credited, but I think that was a catalyst. I think Hollywood on its feet, 50 survivors on stage, holding hands, Gaga singing her heart out, you know, from personal experience. I think that helped move. It went viral. It was global. We were getting letters from around the globe. Oh my God, you know, thank you. I think consciously or unconsciously, women sitting there going, well, if kids are doing this, why aren't we? I don't think it's an accident. So and those kids were there because of the women in the military and men in the military telling their stories. So I think that the military hasn't gotten enough Me Too credit. And honestly, those kids and Gaga and the whole student movement hasn't gotten enough credit. I mean, I know it's a confluence of things, and, you know, thank God for Tarana Burke and all the feminists working on the ground for decades. And I'm not taking anything away from them, but, you know, these things happen in a perfect storm way. And I think that was part of the perfect storm.
Yeah. And unfortunately it didn't win, damn it. And
Should have.
Diane is nominated for the 12th time this year.
600th time. She's
I love Diane.
Everyone who doesn't vote for her, please, everybody, finally. So
all right. So now you think, wow, everybody's going to talk. Everybody's going to speak up, and college administrators and judges and lawyers, and everybody's going to speak up. And then there's a woman named Chanel Miller. I don't know if you read her book, but Chanel Miller was the woman who wasn't going to Stanford, but she was at Stanford at a party and was raped by a top, I think he was a water polo player or something like that. Yeah. And the judge lets the guy off with probation and, you know, a slap on the wrist. And then we come to, I guess, 1.5 years ago, 2 years ago, Christine Blasey Ford talking about Brett Kavanaugh up for Supreme Court. And again, you look at all these people who go, it goes back to what we started with, which is nobody's going to believe me. And why even bring it up? Because they don't. Why can't it change? What is it? That's, I guess, my question. Because what, I mean, it's still, is it still a man's world? I mean, women have come so far. And for those who know me, I'm a big proponent of equal, there is no glass ceiling, boom. Everybody is the same. We're all the same. Why does it continue to go on?
No, patriarchy is a powerful thing. I mean, it's been around for a long time. I mean, it's taken us centuries to get here, right? And it's so been normalized that it's hard to recognize, right? If this is all you know and these are your culture's values, it's hard to imagine different constructs. So it's going to take time. So yes, you know, I actually couldn't watch those hearings. It was too personal for me and too devastating to see that Anita Hill replay with Blasey Ford. Yeah. But we do have to remember, look how far we've come, though. Look how far we've come. I mean, I just told you an anecdote at the start about no one funding Invisible War. And now how many things like you just said, promising young woman, how many things are out on assault? I mean, and how much, you know, how many things are being funded? I mean, it's like, you know, Me Too. I mean, and I remember after Me Too happened, a reporter called me and I said, I don't know if I'm reading the New Yorker or the Onion, but the headlines are like, man accused of assault, man fired. And I'm like, is this an Onion article or is this really happening? I mean, that was unheard of, you know, 7 years ago. So, you know, yes, we've got a long way to go, but it took us a long time getting here. So.
I mean, and so much of it doesn't change. I'm reminded of a movie from many, many years ago called Guide for the Married Man. And Joey Bishop is playing, he's in bed with a young woman and his wife walks into the bedroom, having come home from the market or something. And when Joey Bishop looks at her, the woman in the bed with him gets up, goes into the bathroom, and the wife says, what the hell were you doing? And he says, doing what? And as he gets up, he's making the bed. And she's saying, you were in bed with another woman. How could you? He said, I don't know what you're talking about. Meanwhile, the young woman is dressed now, gets up, walks past the wife and out the door. And Joey Bishop puts his bathrobe on. He's got the newspaper. He goes, sits in the other room and says, honey, I think you're seeing things. And I think about Matt Gaetz today saying, I never did any of this stuff. What are they, crazy? But just deny. And deny works with so many people. Drives me crazy. I don't know. I'm sorry I got off on this tangent.
No.
It was a movie, Guide for the Married Man. Anyway, now let's move because we've got a little bit of time. I know that growing up, or I guess in the early 90s, I think you were a Woody Allen fan, as I was, is. And you thought one way about the whole story of Woody and Mia and, you know, a woman who was scorned and got her daughter to say certain things. But then now it's, you know, you've done all these others. I won't even go into you did a couple other docs, which I mentioned before, which was On the Record about Russell Simmons, and the one about the medical stuff, which I think
Leading Edge. And On the Record is more about Black women in the music industry, just for people. So yeah.
Right. But now, was there always something in the back of your mind? I've always been interested in Alan V. Farrow. What made you guys decide that's the next thing you're going to do?
No, that was a completely random. Our phones blew up after Me Too. Everyone was saying, you guys need to be in the space. You're the people that, you know, helped usher Me Too in. You know this material better than anybody. Women are now eager to talk. So literally we just were like, okay, we got some development money and I'm into this. And I was like, this will be interesting, because it was always like pulling teeth getting people to go on camera. And so I just set up 5 days of shooting in Brooklyn, 5 interviews a day, women from different industries. That's how I met Drew Dixon, who ended up being the lead and on the record, the lead subject and on the record. That is an amazing film. If you haven't watched it, it kind of got buried because of COVID.
You remember, I emailed you right away.
Yeah. Yeah. That's one of the films. I mean, I love All My Children, but that one I hope gets.
That's the one, we won't get into the politics of it, but that's the one that Oprah pulled out of at the last minute.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
So what were we saying?
We're saying, how did you get to Allen v. Farrow?
Oh, so at that house in Brooklyn, one of the interviews we did was with Dylan Farrow, and we were thinking it was just going to be part of Hollywood Me Too. She would be part of that. Like, we didn't need, again, the initial idea was women in different industries and what are the differences of their experiences? What is their life like post Me Too? And so Dylan was sort of folded into that. And
Dylan already had become famous.
Yes, she had already posted. That's how we knew about her. She'd already, but I didn't know much more, and it wasn't really a focus. And then we did the interview and I was like, wait, what? Like, so many things she said were things I did not know. And as you said, I'm old enough that this was my world. I did follow the case, and nothing she said accorded with what my perceptions were based on the media's, presentation of the story. And that was the spark. I mean, I talked to Kirby and Amy Hurdy, the investigative reporter who's amazing and filmmaker that we work with, who initially connected with Dylan, and Amy was like, I think the same thing, and I really want to dive in and see what's there. And so we were like, go. And she went and she kept feeding us this information, and we were like, what? And so that's how that project came about.
It's interesting for me, just as backstory, I was lucky enough to work on Rosemary's Baby, and Mia and I were close to the same age, so we hung out a lot together. And
wow.
A few years later, I guess sometime in the 70s, she was in LA, and we said, oh, let's have lunch at a place called Nickadel's. For those of you at the home, Nickadel's is right next to Paramount Studios. There were 3 restaurants: Oblat's, Lucy's El Adobe, which was Jerry Brown and Linda Ronstadt, and Nickadel's. And I said, yeah, just table of 2. And Mia said, no. We need like 7. I said, 7, who are you bringing? She said, my kids. And so I went and had lunch with Mia at Nickadel's with, I guess, some of the, all the kids she had adopted from everywhere. And what got me at that time, I mean, obviously I've seen her throughout the years, but at that time, what I got was she carried on a conversation with me, totally focused during the whole lunch, and yet took care of all 6 kids at the same time. And I thought, this woman, whatever else she is, she's a real mom.
Yeah, no, 100%.
So when I heard all the Allen stuff in the early 90s, it kept going to me, well, wait a minute, I know Mia. Mia's a mom first. So I was on the other side of it. But so tell me, I'm sorry to interrupt. So
no.
This is your interview, not mine.
No, you're right. She is a consummate mom, which is something people don't know about her and should. And I really resent now in retrospect the whole narrative about her. Oh, so many kids, it's so strange. It's like, why aren't we celebrating someone that takes in children that are disenfranchised? Like, why are we, how many kids aren't disenfranchised and are in therapy? And no one's sitting there and going, how dare you have 3 children? They're in therapy. What's wrong with you? It's like, and yet, someone who's actually trying hard, to help kids that wouldn't have help otherwise. So anyways, that's what we learned and found being close up and studying her life and talking to all the children, is how amazing a mother she is. Honestly, amazing. Like, I have no DNA in common with this woman. She knits, she sews, she builds dollhouses, she gets some French tutors. It's like, I'm like, oh, if there's a television set, there's my kids.
Sorry, we didn't talk about it, but you do have 3, I understand, amazing daughters, and with your genes, your DNA, I'm sure they are brilliant.
They're lovely.
Well, good for you. So I guess my question is, why do you think? I mean, what comes to me in the documentary is how celebrity can control the media, not just the media, but the justice system. That there is a, just like there is in other areas of our society. Who was it? I was listening to somebody who said, "Oh, this guy is such a-hole," and I said, "Well, he was always great with me." And he said, "Well, because you're on the same level with him. Everybody else he treats like shit." And now I remember who we were talking about, just a producer who's just been outed for his abuse. I don't need to say his name. Everybody probably knows. But everybody said, "Well, haven't you known him?" I said, "I've known him for 30 years and I've heard all the stories." But it's like, it's one of those people who goes, "Jesus Christ, you get out of here. Oh, hi, Hawk, how are you?" It's that change. And I think the same thing happens with celebrity. I've watched a million times the maitre d' at the restaurant, or the police officer, or whoever it is. If it's Woody Allen, whoa. So talk about that, and how the judges and that whole thing that went on in Connecticut. Talk about that, and how celebrity really changes everything.
Yeah. Well, what you said reminded me of a funny anecdote, since this is Inside Hollywood. So back to the Invisible War Oscar nomination luncheon.
Right.
This relates to what you just said.
Yeah.
I'm nobody, right? I'm the poor relation. I'm the documentary, like, who cares? They sit me at a table. They sit me next to Harvey Weinstein.
Wow.
Okay. This is right. I'm at that. You were speaking at that luncheon. So I sit down, I look at the little place cards. I don't know anyone at the table. They're all being very nice, right? Harvey sits down, looks at me and says, "You're not Katie Couric." He doesn't even say hello. He goes, "You're not Katie Couric. I'm supposed to be sitting next to Katie Couric." Well, he wasn't, because his card was next to me. Katie's across from me. I get up, I walk over to her. I say, "Do you want to switch seats with me?" I mean, I felt so bad. Like, "Do you want to switch seats with me because he wants to sit next to you?" And she's like, "No, fuck him." And I was like, "Sorry, but it's exactly what you're talking about." I mean, like, unless like you're somebody, I'm like, so that was my luncheon experience. Now it's my only Harvey encounter.
Well, you're lucky he didn't want to take you up to the.
I think I was not his type, not an actress and over the age of 22. Where were we? So yeah, no, well, that's what we found in doing Alan v. Farrow, is that the celebrity is a powerful, powerful, powerful thing. And don't underestimate how powerful it is. And terrible things can be done. And, it can be a real shield, for a lot of things, and a real way for people to do things and get away with them, is what I learned in a big way.
I'm thinking of two that come to mind for me. One is OJ, and the other is Arnold Schwarzenegger. Arnold Schwarzenegger, when he ran for governor of California, would go into the San Joaquin Valley, and he'd shake the hands of people weighing, "Hey man, the Terminator, where do I vote?" Had nothing to do with what he was as a politician. But
or Ronald Reagan. I mean,
Ronald Reagan, exactly.
I mean,
or Donald Trump.
Yeah, or Donald Trump, right? No, we don't learn that lesson. Or the monarchy. I mean, we want our kings and queens, as much as we say we like democracy. I mean, celebrity is the transmutation of that, right? It's our celebrity is our monarchy, and people want that. They want that kind of leadership. They want that belief in something outside of themselves that they can emulate and aspire to be. It's hard. And they narcissistically identify, which we found with Woody.
So when you found, I think was it the prosecutor or the defense attorney in Connecticut?
The prosecutor, Frank Jacob.
Tell us about that because I found that so interesting that I think if I'm remembering right, he came out and said that he didn't bring her to the stand because he didn't want the 7-year-old to have to get up on the stand, and he knew that she was guilty, or maybe
The
I'm making
prosecution.
Hmm?
Well, he thought there was enough to successfully prosecute a case, but he was very worried about her emotional health. And that was the only reason the case didn't move forward, according to him. And we looked at the police report and there was a lot there. And if you watch the series, there's a lot there. I mean, there's a lot. It's not what we all were made to believe.
Well, so you get all this information. You get all this information, and do you and Kirby say, we've got to make sure everybody knows how guilty he is, or we've got to make sure to present it as fairly as we possibly can, and let the evidence fall where it may?
That's the truth. We didn't have any preconceived notions. I didn't know. I was a fan going in, I had no clue. I'd only heard what the press said. I didn't know Mia. I had nothing. I just heard Dylan say this stuff and I was like, what? And then Amy was like, I'm going to investigate. And then she kept bringing us stuff and we really just followed the evidence. And if you watch it, it's just following the evidence, especially episode 3, it really lays it all out. Like what we found, what was covered up. Oh, it's quite astonishing, and how successfully it was covered up because of the power that, Mr. Allen and the people around him had.
And the money.
Yeah.
Interesting. I read somewhere that all the other docs that you made, most of the press were just reporting on it and trying to find out, what you said and but they didn't ask the kinds of questions they asked about Alan v. Farrow. Do you know what I mean? There were a lot more questions about, well, did you really find the truth? And were you trying to be, were you being on Mia's side? Why do you think there was backlash? Is that because—
That's so astute of you to recognize that? That really is. No one else has picked up on that, but say more.
Well, I just wonder if it's the celebrity, the money, and the fact that Woody is one of the great filmmakers. I mean, you can't, I know people have a hard time separating. Listen, I did 2 movies with Roman Polanski. He's one of the greatest filmmakers ever. And so people have a hard time separating the two. So my question is, why do you think the backlash is so much stronger than, some very nice young girls who were raped at college, or some wonderful woman in the military that was— nobody seems to have the furor that you guys have had because of this. Talk about that.
Well, I think I'm A, amazed you perceive that, and B, I think you're 100% right. And it did not occur to us beforehand, but he's a hometown guy. These are entertainment critics. These are people who have a real deep affection and connection to Woody Allen. That's longstanding and profound, and he's formative to many of their ways of seeing film. Maybe he's why they went into thinking about film. So this is not something that was easy for them to see or watch or hear or want to see or watch or hear. So I think that is consciously and unconsciously reflected in the way they, received and processed the series in a way that we didn't anticipate. But, in a lot of the interviewers did start out by saying, this was rough for me. It was personal in a way that the military and hunting ground is not so personal for the people writing these criticisms and these articles and these reviews. And that was interesting. Did not occur to me, but it is what you said. It does show the reach and the profundity of our connection to celebrity, or the way we affect onto them, how meaningful they are to us, to our profound identity, and to shake something in us. That's not easy.
How has this flack, how is the flack from all the different ones you've done different with this one? And how has this one affected you personally?
That's an interesting question. I don't think it's affected me personally. I was surprised by it. I was disappointed by it. I think I think it's blocked people from analyzing the piece as a piece in a way that I think it deserves. I think it's one of our most honestly accomplished and sophisticated works. I think, but I don't think people are capable of reading it or bringing to it the critical acumen and the analysis that it merits because of those blockages. So that's a bit sad, but honestly, I love, and this is not BS. I do what I do because that's where the passion is. And, wherever things land, they're going to land. So, but.
Okay. So I have I'm not even going to clarify it. Tell us about a time that you are interviewing somebody and they break down and you break down. Can you remember one or two where I was watching.
I do. You were
Okay.
watching.
I don't
Go
need to
ahead.
go any further. Go
You were
ahead.
watching. Go ahead.
No, I was watching the news the other day, and I watched George Floyd's younger brother on the stand,
Oh,
and I was a wreck, just a wreck. So, at any rate, I wondered where are those times where you're sitting there trying to be the staunch documentarian and asking the questions and trying to pull that wall, and then you're a basket case. And I'm looking right now, and I'm seeing that emotion. And by the way, I love that, and I love that about you, Jenna, Amy.
well, yeah. Well, you made me remember. It was a girl in Berkeley. She was a sophomore, and she came in, and we sat down, and she was a sophomore, as I said, and she brought her teddy bear with her. And she was holding it, and we were doing this interview, and she told me during the interview that she'd never told her parents. And she's telling me, a stranger. And that, I started to cry. I was like, how have you never told your parents, honey? And she said, well, I didn't ever want them to look at me any differently. And I didn't want them to be in any kind of pain. And then she asked me if I wanted her bear to hold her teddy bear. So that was a time I just couldn't, and then I felt bad. Here it's this poor girl is now, I need to hold it together for her. I'm supposed to be the container of the space and supporting her. And here she is feeling like she needs to take care of me, give me her bear. But yeah, it's intense.
Wow. I'm sorry to do this, but I love that we've been able to get to this point.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Your father was in the medical supplies, or he invented some. Was it a medical piece of what? I was trying to get to.
But he, my father, may he rest in peace, got out of the camps, got himself to Brooklyn College, was rescued by the Red Cross, was recuperated in tents in Sweden, which is why my brothers always bought Volvos. And then moved to America, got into Brooklyn College, sorry, couldn't speak a word of English, right? His high school, he had never been to high school, got into college, couldn't speak a word of English. So he started taking science classes. Ended up getting a PhD in physics, ended up doing the heat shields for the Apollos in Boston. We all lived in Boston. He had space sciences. Whitaker Corporation calls him and says, you know what? Space is booming. You got to come out west. We're going to compete with NASA. We're going to have a second space, and you're going to run it because you've got business acumen and you've got the smarts. You did the heat shields, moves us all out. That's how we end up in Beverly Hills. He knew nothing. My parents knew nothing about any of this. Someone just said there's good schools and they're free, go there, and there's Jews in Beverly Hills. So we land in Beverly Hills. You know, it's not lucrative being a space scientist. So we're not, you know, it was like being Martians.
What elementary school did you go to?
El Rodeo.
Okay.
And this is the 60s. So we bought a house in 1962. It was like $60,000, honestly. So there we are, right? And they know no one, but they know that the schools are free and their kids. And then the space industry dies. Whitaker's like, nothing's happening. I don't even remember, like, there's, you know, we're disbanding, goodbye. He has no job. He has the synagogue though, right? My dad went to 3 guys at the temple and said, so some point at the temple said, you know what, you should own a car wash or go into the car wash business because everyone's car is dirty here. So my dad, who had all this background, literally, I grew up doing cashier at La Cienega Car Wash. That was my childhood. My brothers did Kiss Off. That was his job. And the whole time he's running the car wash, he was looking for something else. And someone came to him and said, I have a better way of doing diagnostic blood tests. I swear to God, it'll beat Simon's, it'll beat, you know, Abbott, all the people out there. It's just better. And I'm science stupid. You know, I didn't get that. My kids got it. I skipped me. And my dad was like, that's interesting. And he bought chemistry books. And I remember he sat in our house and he taught himself, he's a physicist. He taught himself chemistry. He went to 3 guys at the Temple Beth Am, and he said, I need $30,000 from each of you. You might never see your money back. Trust me though, I think this is real. And they started in our house in the basement in Beverly Hills. They started making kits.
Max Salter was one of them, right?
Max Salter was one of them.
Right.
Exactly. And Max, my father never forgot. Max didn't want a contract. He said, it's a handshake. And my dad never forgot that and was blown away by that. And it worked. You know, he started giving away the kits for free. You know, that's the only way to do it. And people were like, oh, it's more accurate and it's faster. And that was the company, and it grew. And that was when he was 40 years old, he started that. So, and that was when I was in college. So, you know, mostly my life was like, you know, car wash world and then medical supply world. So that's what he did until he was, you know, until he passed away.
Wow.
That's the business he ran.
Wow. Well, but that did the bleeding edge. I guess what I was asking was, because it was medical devices, was that when you started hearing about that? Was that through your dad that you knew about the corruption in medical devices, or?
No, that was through Amy Hurdy, the investigative producer. She heard someone tell her a story about this crazy, what was it? She said, you've got to go meet this woman in Irvine. And I drove out to Irvine and I had coffee with this woman, and she was like, oh, damn it. She's from a famous family in Chicago. And she's like, I'm a so-and-so. And she told me this horrific story. And I was like, what? It was kind of like an invisible word. I was like, what are you talking about? How could this happen? And she's like, yeah. And I found out the thing had never been tested. It was, you know, basically we're guinea pigs. And I was like, and then that's how Bleeding Edge. It wasn't through that, but the only funny thing about Bleeding Edge was, so I knew nothing and we just dove in and we did this film. And that I recommend the people watching this, you're the demographic to watch that. It's all about medical devices, anything prosthetic that they put in you, you have to watch it actually. And it led to 2 products being taken off the market right after it came out, Johnson & Johnson and Bayer. But what was I saying? So, the funny thing about that was that, you know, my brothers went into the business with my dad, but I did not. And so I have no relation to the industry. And when Bleeding Edge came out, my brother called and said, oh my God, everybody at Siemens is watching your film. Cause he was still, you know, knows people in the business. Like, I'm getting so many calls from people in the industry, like, that film is really rocking it. So that was funny. That was I'm sad my dad wasn't alive to see that film.
So can you give us what's next? Can you tell us about what you guys are working on? I'm sure you're working on more than one, but is there anything that you're working on that we're allowed to hear about? Because when you go to work on something, a lot of people shake and a lot of people are going, yay!
People don't like getting my phone calls, especially men. Yeah, we've got one that's a secret. And Alan B. Farrow was a secret. No one knew. My family didn't know because we were so scared because he's, that it would get shut down or people wouldn't talk to us. So that was a secret. So we've got a big one that's a secret that Kirby thinks is the Moby Dick of our films. I don't know. It's dark. And then we've got one on the cosmetics industry, which is, I can talk about. That's not as, so those are the two in first position. And we have a couple others we're looking at and developing. I would personally like to do something a lot lighter. I'm exhausted. It's exhausting. As you can see that if I can cry just remembering an interview, imagine the toll these things take, you don't come out the same person.
A comedy. Find something funny.
That would be nice.
So I forgot to ask a question earlier on that you reminded me when you talked about men. Tell us why men who have been sexually assaulted don't want to talk to you or talk to anybody about it.
That's the saddest. And that's the next frontier. I mean, I think we're still too homophobic a society for men to feel safe. I mean, that's been really tragic. And we were hoping that making the films that we make would be a gateway. If we can break the silence for women, that'll in turn break the silence for men. But I don't think that, I think it's starting to happen, but it hasn't happened to the degree that it needs to. But most men are too ashamed. It's just so shameful because of all of our toxic masculinity. You're supposed to be strong. You're supposed to be a fighter. You're supposed to be tough. And then our homophobia. So those two things combined make men it takes such a toll. It's very, very sad.
Well, we've only got a few minutes left. So I want to give Jen and Freda, and I don't know if Bob Beecher, our CEO, is on, but please come on, guys, and see if there's anything that, hi, Jen.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello.
Where's Bob Beecher?
Bob's on his way.
Okay.
If he's available.
Do you guys have anything that you'd like that I skipped or missed or?
I have a ton, but it would take another hour and a half. I have our standard questions that we ask everyone that joins us on Creative Chaos. And I also like to ask people that join us what you know about MPTF, what your touchstones to MPTF are, and how we can help inform you about this nearly 100-year-old charity. Not nearly, it's our 100th this year.
Tell me about it. I don't know anything. I just did this because Hawk called me, and I do anything Hawk. When Hawk calls, I answer.
You hear that, Bob?
There's only good things come from his phone calls.
So can I tee this up, and then Freda, Bob, you guys can launch in?
I think it's a perfect Bob opportunity.
Me? No. Oh, I thought Jen was.
She knows nothing about MPTF, Bob.
You know nothing about MPTF?
No.
Oh.
I called her and she said yes.
How
He
much
just said,
time?
"Do you want to do this thing?" I said, "Sure."
How much time do we have left on the show?
5 minutes.
Yeah.
I mean, do you really want me to tell you something about MPTF right now? Yeah. So, okay. So we are, this is 2021. This is our 100th anniversary.
Congratulations.
Yes, thank you. Hawk has been around for most of that time. We were founded in 1921 by one of the great women of our industry, Mary Pickford, who had survived the pandemic of 1918 and moved to Hollywood, and this new industry called Hollywood, the film industry was starting. And she noticed that people who worked in the industry were primarily freelance. And so they were, occasionally unemployed, and sometimes for long times unemployed. There was no social safety net. Wasn't Social Security. There wasn't, unions and any of that stuff. So she started this charity called the Motion Picture Relief Fund. And the idea was, if you were very socialistic, if you were fortunate enough to be working, you were supposed to drop a coin in the coin box and help those who were between jobs or needed some support.
So nice.
And, that basic concept has continued for 100 years. Obviously, we do a lot more today than just financial assistance. We have a 20-acre campus in Woodland Hills, and we have 250 retired members of the industry living here in memory care, long-term care, independent and assisted living. We have 20 social workers in the community supporting working and retired industry members. Last year, we were sort of the cornerstone of support for members of the industry. When they were working, they needed financial assistance, and more important, they needed a phone call and a hug and someone to say, "We care about you. How are you doing? How can we help you?" And for that, in 2 weeks, we'll be getting the Jean Hersholt Humanitarian Oscar.
Oh my God.
Yeah, actually, on TV during the ceremony. Hawk is one of our board members. I've been fortunate enough to be a board member for many years and the CEO for 10 years. Freda has known about us for a great part of her adult life because her husband comes from an industry family. She comes from an industry family, and her mother-in-law was a resident here in her final years. So, we're full of showbiz people.
Well,
And
our
all-
mantra for
Yeah.
100 years has been, we take care of our own.
Yeah.
And it's one of the only industries that I've ever heard of that we really do take care of our own.
I was going to say, I don't know many other industries where, well,
Yeah. I mean, for all of the shit that people throw at the entertainment industry, much of it well-deserved, at the core of it is and tremendously generous people and a willingness to take care of their own, and recognition by those who really made it that their careers have been built on the work of 250 people on a film or TV set who are, schlepping around and earning a middle class income.
I'd like to add, we spoke to a woman today who was still is an actress and a voiceover artist.
Yeah.
And she's one of the many, many people who got a financial grant when she was struggling in between jobs that was able to keep her in Los Angeles and connected to the industry until the next, wave, because it's an ebb and flow in this industry.
That was a shocker to me, Jen, and that was so amazing to hear that and to hear her advocacy for us. It was really beautiful, spontaneous and beautiful.
I am going to call when everything is back to normal, and I'm going to call you and say, let me take you out and show you the campus, because I think you'll really love it. So
I love that.
all I can tell you is this has been, I've done, 15 or 20 of these over the last 6-7 months. This has definitely been the highlight. You really are amazing.
Fantastic.
Amazing force. And I thank you for honoring us with all your thoughts, Amy. Really.
Thank you. That's very sweet. You got to get out more.
Yeah.
Clearly.
And Amy, thank you for honoring the world and for blessing the world with your work.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And as you guys said, I think Hollywood deserves a lot of credit for me too, for all the criticism it takes. That wasn't an easy lift for those women.
Yeah.
So, but thank you all. This is a beautiful organization. I didn't know, and I'm glad to know about it. And I'm not surprised that Hawk's part of it. And I'm just grateful for your interest and the time and all that you do. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Everybody.